Hey, everybody. Thank you for joining us for today's episode of Certainty Talks. On this show, we talk about certainty, a topic that feels more important today than ever before, but all in all, always an important topic. Today, we have my good friend and business partner in the Whale Club, Paul Sparks, who are not only a very successful real estate investor, but also a certified certainty advisor. Now, we do this show because a wise man once asked a question. If you look at the last 3 years of your business by months and turn all your negative months into zeros, what would happen to your bottom line? And that wise man is Dan Nicholson. And now we are here to achieve financial certainty by rigging the game in your favor. Now, I'm also on a mission to create 100 millionaires. The podcast alone is enough to help you become a millionaire in the next 5 to 7 years. If you'll take consistent action, you will become one. And if you get value out of the show, please share this episode right now. That way we can all grow together. Now, some of the things we talk about today are going to sound a little confusing. All I ask is keep an open mind, keep an open loop. Don't try to close the loop so fast. You might miss some of the things that we're trying to talk about. And we're going to start off, as usual, with a 6-word update. Well, actually, before we do that, Paul, how about you introduce our special guest?
Well, welcome, Dan. It's awesome to have you back. Dan was on our first show, maybe even our second show, but it's good to have him back. I was sort of making a list here. You asked me to introduce Dan. Here's how I would describe Dan. He is an accountant extraordinaire. So Dan runs one of the top mid-size accounting firms in the nation, which means he works with business owners like ourselves. He is an entrepreneur, has launched multiple successful businesses in multiple different domains. He's the creator of the Certainty operating system, which is responsible for this show and the content that we're talking about. He has also won the award for best hair in Seattle for the last 10 years plus. So he doesn't advertise that. He is the chief whale officer as part of the Whale Club. So he's responsible for staying up to date on all the latest whale facts out there, right? So if you got any questions about whales, talk to Dan. And then most recently, he is the author of a fantastic book called Rigging the Game, which has, in a week's time, jumped up to #1 on 10 plus categories on Amazon, heading towards, some bestseller lists. So welcome, Dan. We're extremely excited to have you today.
Yeah, super excited to be here, and apologies in advance for a scratchy throat, but I'll do my best to enunciate.
Awesome. And I think the title, my favorite title I've seen of Dan is from the Wolf Den. I believe it's the Wolf Den, which says Wealth Wizard. So let's start off with the 6-word update. So I got my own, and I wrote down rigging the game fixed my focus.
That's good. I wrote down something. Heard some conversations from Nick and Dan recently about integrity. And so my 6-word update was, would you follow you into battle?
Yeah.
Question about leadership and integrity, right? Like, you ask your team to follow you into battle. Would you follow yourself into battle? It's a question I ask myself constantly as a way to kind of reflect on my leadership skills. And yeah.
Yeah, that's powerful. That's a great question. Great question to ask yourself. Do you have one, Dan?
I do have one, and it came up from yesterday. You are always the cheat code.
I like it. Especially it takes me back. Paul might not know about this, but Dan, you remember Nintendo Power?
Oh, yeah.
Right?
100%.
So you got it. I mean, the first thing you do, right, when you get Nintendo Power, you go straight to the cheat code section. Right.
Absolutely.
So I think cheat codes, absolutely. I think that's absolutely critical. So, Paul, why don't you lead us off for what we're going to talk about today?
So what we're going to talk about today is Dan's book, Rigging the Game. And I love that your 6-word update, Dan. I can't recall specifically the 6 words that you just said, but you are the cheat code for your own life. And I take that as the second wealth commandment, which is preference versus binary. A lot of us don't realize that we have all the answers. The problem is we get caught trying to play other people's games. We get caught trying to ask people, well, what should I do? How should I do this? So we're going to talk about that today. And I'd like to turn it over to Dan first to just tell us a little bit about the book. Tell us a little bit about maybe like why you decided to write this book, Dan.
Well, first off, you nailed it with your comment about my 6-word update being connected back to commandment number 2, which is around understanding the difference between preference-based decisions and binary decisions, those decisions that have an actual right and wrong. And turns out almost every question you're probably asking yourself, at least as it relates to your business, is a preference. It depends on what you want. Now, I got really interested in this concept of rigging the game several years back as I frankly kept failing in new business ventures. And on paper, my resume, business degree, all the things that you listed off, like, why do I keep failing in these new ventures? I'm doing all the research. I think I'm a reasonably smart guy. Like, why is something that I did in one business not carrying forward? I started to notice these patterns in particular understanding systems. And this quote that I love that says, every system is perfectly designed to get the results it gets. And so if you don't like the results it's getting, you could choose to just be a victim and feel sorry for yourself, or you could endeavor to try to change the system or change your behavior within that system. And so as I started to think about that, you see all these, how that plays out, how it plays out in taxes. You want to pay less in taxes, got to modify your behavior to conform to the benefits within the tax code. That's what the wealthy and the sophisticated business owners are doing. You want to go and have a top-ranked podcast like Steve and Paul, like understand the way the ranking systems work and modify your behavior to get the outcome that you want. You want to go number 1 in a bunch of different categories in Amazon, figure out how that system works, modify your behavior to capitalize on that. And you sort of can go on and on and on into all these different domains. And the domains are different, but the process is, and the principles at least, remain the same. And that's really what my book is about, with the Certainty operating system is about getting what you want on your terms without compromise.
I saw you talking about this the other day. The title, Rigging the Game. Now, rigging the game, I think, has inherently a negative connotation. So how did you come up with that title?
Yeah, so this is just probably another example of something I talk a lot about playing your game. So as Paul mentioned in the beginning, the very first thing he said is Dan has an accounting firm. And if you don't know me, right away you're like, cool, so they're having a super boring guest on today, like an accountant? Like, why am I tuning into this? And I only got an accounting degree because I thought it'd be the best skill set to be an entrepreneur. I didn't realize that I would never get that stank off me for the rest of my life. And so, so I mentioned that because not only did I get an accounting degree, but then I doubled down and I ended up doing this fellowship where I helped write an accounting standard. And trust me, I won't get into those details. But I was 22 at the time, and I was single, and I was living in Norwalk, Connecticut, Fairfield County. I think the average age has got to be like 55. And it's the second richest county in the US. So being single already at 22, like there's not a lot of prospects. And then you go out, say a bar, as people used to do, because 20 years ago when I was 22, that's depressing to say, but we didn't have all the apps and everything like now. And you go out and you meet somebody, you have like a nice conversation, start off and they're like, so what do you do? Like, oh, I write accounting standards. And it's like, you could hear glass break, like everyone has dropped to like their cocktail in the bar. They're screeching sound like, oh, so you are the most boring person in this entire bar.
You win.
Moving on, you win. And this competition is the most boring person. And so that was this inflection point where I realized I got to take a different approach. I can't just lead with, I'm an accounting person. I got to lead with something either kind of hyperbolic or something super generic, that it's almost comical. Like, who even says that? So I started saying, I'm a business person. Like, hi, yeah, what's up? What's going on? Oh, what do you do? Oh, I'm a business person. Like, business person? Like, what does that even mean? And then it was like a entry point into a conversation. And then later when I started an accounting firm and I would go to these networking events, it was like the same thing over again, where you'd meet someone, oh, what do you do? I run an accounting firm. Oh, got it. Moving on. Like, you're the most. And so I started saying I'm a non-conventional accountant, or I would say I'm a business person. In both instances, they're like, oh, okay, what is a I know what an accountant is, but how could you, accountants are conventional. Accounting is conventions. How could you be non-conventional? That's like contradictory. Like, okay, well, let me tell you about what I do. So that's a long kind of narrative into rigging the game is like something I want to do, but I don't know if I'm allowed to. Mm-hmm. So what do you mean? And it's an entry point into a conversation where now I can provide distinction.
Yeah. And I like, you know, if you look at entrepreneurism, I think most entrepreneurs, not all, but I think most, are maybe just a little less compliant. You know, they really enjoy the gray areas. And so something I've always prided myself in is knowing all the rules to the best of my abilities so that I can break them the right way. You know, bend them this way, bend them that way, right? To navigate it, to maximize. And it sounds like
that's kind of what we're talking about. Once you understand the system, the rules, then you can modify your behavior based on within the construct of those rules to get the outcome that you actually want.
Yeah.
And we all know that intuitively that the really wealthy are doing that already.
Oh, they're doing it at the best levels. One thing, you know, Paul talked about earlier is this goes back to, was it wealth commandment number 2, playing your game? So one of the things I really enjoyed hearing you guys talk about before was like identifying the way you like to play based off your favorite sport or hobby. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, so the concept of play your game is something I learned from my mentor, Randy Massengale. Randy, prolific career, senior advisor to people like Bill Gates, people like the founder of InfoSpace, so on and so forth. And fortunate enough to call him a mentor as well. And in my very first meeting with him, he asked me all these personal questions, and in particular, a lot of questions about basketball, which is my favorite sport growing up. And like half the meeting, we were talking about basketball. And we get to the end, and I'm like, oh, okay. Did we really accomplish much other than we kind of bonded over basketball? He was a college basketball player. His son was a college basketball player. Like, okay, we kind of bonded over this. And then he proceeded to basically tell me everything about my style in business. And it was spot on in the most sort of revealing 10 to 15 minute conversation that I've ever had. Like, someone was able to kind of pinpoint me so precisely in such a short period of time, and then help me kind of unlock ways that I was misstepping in business because I was playing someone else's game. I wasn't leaning into my own strengths. I was more spending time trying to address my weaknesses. So I have to credit Randy with really teaching me this concept of playing your game. And really it starts with this idea that what is going to make you, and this is sort of a little bit hyperbolic, but how can we expect to do something extraordinary if we're going to conform to the average? So how can we expect to do something extraordinary if we're going to conform to the average? It's a contradiction. It's almost like saying non-conventional accountant. But that's what we're doing in our lives, is we say, I want to start a business because I want financial freedom. I want to design a life of my dreams. I want to be able to, I don't want a boss. And then what do? We go out and we seek consensus, and we go to all these masterminds, and we just get to have someone like, just tell me what to do. Just give me, there's got to be the best way. Just tell me the right way. Well, if you go and you join this mastermind in your specific niche, and then you're implementing the strategy that everyone else is doing, you just conform to the average. how are you possibly then going to do something extraordinary? Actually, you just assigned a system that's almost going to prevent you from doing something extraordinary. And so that's why we have to play our game, lean into our strengths, our natural tendencies, because that's what's going to carry us to that extraordinary path. And when you look at the data, the people who are doing something extraordinary now, they were just called weirdos when they were kids, and now they're called eccentric billionaires.
Yeah. So taking this application, it's all three of us have a passion for basketball. So in your conversation with Randy, what did you guys uncover as your style of basketball?
Yeah, good question. And in my book, I break down, if you want to figure out playing your game, the questions and the exercises to go through so that you can take your favorite sport or hobby. It doesn't have to be a sport, because some people, hey, what do I do if I didn't like basketball or I didn't play a sport? Well, you probably had a hobby. And when you're doing that hobby, it was maybe perhaps the freest expression of who you were. Ignoring overbearing parents and telling you have to do things a certain way.
Right.
So if you want to go through the exercises in my book, that said, I'm 6'2", and so growing up, I was usually one of the taller kids. Although in terms of professional or collegiate sports, 6'2" is like point guard. But growing up, you're more like, hey, put the tall kid under the hoop. And also, I'm pretty good at doing things in like a straight line, but I'm not very great in, I'm not the most athletically gifted person. So naturally, I was the kid under the hoop, forward, center, in organized sports. But if I'm playing in like pickup basketball, the way that I actually want to play, it's more like shooting guard. I want the ball in my hands. I'm going to I'm willing to take the last shot. But again, because I'm not the most athletically gifted person, I've got to rely more on hustle, diving on the floor, chasing after ball, kind of going all in during the game. And so that turns out that that's kind of my default tendency in business. I like to have the ball in my hands. Like I like to be the decision maker. And I'm willing to take some risks. I'm willing to take the last shot. I'm willing to take the scrutiny that comes along with it, right? If you got the ball in your hands and you're taking the majority of the shots, or you're taking the final shot, you lose the game. You have to bear the weight of the scrutiny and the expectations. We talk about in CCA, the two tyrants of leadership, scrutiny and expectations. In that role of shooting guard, you have to be willing to take that, the scrutiny and expectations. And I tend to put in maximum effort. So those are my tendencies. Now, those are my greatest strengths. They can also be my greatest weakness. So sometimes I'm taking too many shots. Sometimes I'm putting in too much effort, too much hustle, and you got to pass the ball to. If you watch The Last Dance, sometimes if you got to pass the ball to Steve Kerr in the corner to hit the three to win the game. Like you don't always need to take that shot. And so knowing that, it's a way to calibrate and go, okay, you know what? I've been too passive for a while. That's why I'm feeling complacent in my business, unhappy. We're not firing in all cylinders. I've shied away from scrutiny and expectations. Okay, I need to put myself back in the role that I'm the most comfortable with.
I see.
And be aware of taking it too far.
I see Paul nodding as you're going through your basketball example. So I think Paul probably has some similarities. So Paul, what's your basketball style?
Paul and I are very similar.
Yes. Well, this makes me think of, because that was me. I was the captain of my varsity basketball team, and it's like, give me the ball, I'm gonna take the last shot. And that's how I run my business as well. So what I really took out of that was this, oh my gosh, I'm still that same kid. And that's where I'm most comfortable, right? Is taking that shot, putting the team's fate like on your shoulders. I also think of something that, my dad used to tell me as a kid about, the shooter's mentality, right? If you shoot and you miss, what do shooters do? They keep shooting, right? Keep shooting. And so what I really got out of that whole exercise is if you can align the way you played sports or hobbies as a kid with the way you play business, because that's your natural tendency, right? You're going to have a lot more, a better time playing your game and not getting forced to play someone else's game. I wouldn't do well in a business where I don't take the last shot. That's just not my style. So really understanding how you play those games is really helpful as you're looking around and saying, am I playing my game in business, or am I playing somebody else's game?
You know, as we're talking through this, I realize now finally why I was so unfulfilled at Intel. And it's because I didn't get to take risks. I didn't get to take the last shot. So like, I am not athletically gifted and I'm not very tall. So for me, I worked on my jump shot a lot because that's the one thing I can do that work ethic fixes, right? I can't jump that much higher. I can't get any faster, but I can have a good jump shot. So on a basketball court, I will run past or through or around every single screen. I will not stop on defense. And I will box out on every single possession, right? And I want the last shot. And it's funny to see how that translates to business, right? I will outwork you as a business owner, right? I will outwork you. I will follow processes. I will follow a process that I know has been proven, which is the jump shot, right? My jump shot is going to be fundamentally sound, and everything I'm going to do is going to be fundamentally sound because it's going to be process oriented. And then, yeah, like this morning, you know, I missed the game winner, but I took it, right? I took the last shot because, and I've always wanted the last shot, even though I'm not going to be the best player. I'm very confident I'm going to be the best shooter, and I want that last shot.
I love the conversation we're having right now, and just how revealing this is. And it probably resonates with the people who are watching. I need to hire these other roles to complement me and not have my next hire be another shooting guard, because then we're going to be potentially either conflicting with each other, or there's just redundancy and we haven't filled out our team properly. And so you can use
a point in that. I mean, Steve, what do a lot of people who come into the real estate investing space, oftentimes we're the best salesperson, right? We start this business and we know that our business is a sales and marketing business, at least on the wholesaling side, right? That's what it is. And so we are this excellent shooting guard. We know how to come in and knock down shots. We can create space from the defense and score. That's what we're really good at. But then what happens is 6 months, a year in, a year and a half in, whatever, we go out and we hire another acquisitions manager. And we're trying to hire another shooting guard. And it's like, well, you're taking yourself out of the most important part, the value that you add to that team, which is scoring. What you really need is that point guard to get you the ball. You need that center to get in there and get that rebound for you. You know, you might need the coach that can help you, you know, work on your one-on-one ball handling moves, right? I'm getting jacked up. I'm about to have to go to the gym after. But yeah, that's the mistake that I made, is I came in and I was like, oh, I'll just step into the coach role. And that's a huge mistake, because that is not my natural tendency on the court. My tendency is give me the ball. I want the ball. Mm-hmm. Right. And so if you're aligned, if that's the type of way that you play the game, recognize that by pulling you out of that position, you're no longer playing your game.
Yeah, you're playing the opposite of your game, and now you're trying to play point. Right.
Exactly.
Yeah. You got to hire a point guard, which is, you know, for everyone in the wholesaling business and the flipping business is the lead manager. Right.
Yeah.
And you got to have the center to follow up, which is basically, you know, call everyone that you couldn't close. Right. And keep following up with them. Right. Go get those boards.
That's right.
Yeah. So just to maybe state the obvious, you can do the challenge with interviewing is that people who interview well don't necessarily do good at their job, and vice versa. People who are really great at their job don't always interview well. And so you can, yeah, I know, but it's just like shocking to hear this.
Are you just learning
so
this now, Paul?
No.
When we're just asking these traditional behavioral questions and tell me about your greatest strength and your greatest weakness and what's your favorite cereal and what does that mean about you? And if you were a color, what would you be and why? Like, cool. Okay. We checked a bunch of boxes, downloaded some cool questions off the internet. People have practiced these questions. Have we really learned what their natural tendencies are? Probably not, because they're giving you the answer that they think that you need to hear to hire them for this job. When I start talking to someone about their favorite sport or hobby, just the way Randy did with me, I am not realizing in that moment that Randy was learning a bunch about who I am and my natural tendencies. And so you can sort of go, okay, well, for this role, I need a point guard, or I need somebody who was their natural tendency in their favorite sport or hobby is to be a distributor. Or, you know what, I need an independent contributor. You know, how did they show up in their favorite sport or hobby? You can have this nice conversation, but you can glean a lot more than asking them these traditional interview questions.
Yeah. One of the things I learned some time ago, because I kept hiring poorly.
Yeah, me too.
And what I learned was that the people that interview the best are generally the worst candidates. And now if someone interviews really well, I start seeing flashing red lights. And the reason why is because if they interview really well, that just means they've had more practice interviewing than anybody else. And if they had more practice interviewing than anybody else, then that should be a concern.
Right.
That needs to be a new principle, Dan.
Yeah.
Another thing we do as well as entrepreneurs is we tend to hire people like ourselves, right? That's kind of what Paul was saying earlier. Because we want to hang out with other shooting guards. And what happens when we hang out with other shooting guards? We got the bronze dream team. Right, we got the U.S. Olympic team that got the bronze medal, right? Because we hired a bunch of shooting guards. We hired a bunch of scorers that are like us versus people that complement us.
Mm-hmm.
So it's so true. It's such a good observation.
Yeah. What were some other big takeaways for you, Paul, as far as rigging the game?
Well, I want to ask Dan, I think one of the biggest takeaways that I've gotten from the Certainty operating system and learning Dan is this concept of asymmetry. And, you know, we talk about barbells and we talk about solvable problems, but I want to just like explain it in extremely simple terms and then let Dan sort of elaborate. The concept I got from Dan and what I feel truly is the essence of how to rig the game. And we actually had a question come up about this. Well, how do we address risk? That's really what this is. It's about removing risk. That's what asymmetry means. So the concept that Dan taught me is if you, instead of focusing on the upside, all the good things that could happen, if we can just eliminate the downside, so we can take away the downside, and instead of focusing on the upside, we focus on how to reduce the amount of downside that we have, all we're left then with is upside. And so that concept alone was like, I would say a little jarring for me as a shooting guard, because all I'm looking at is like, look at all this upside. Look at all these opportunities I have to shoot, right? And instead I've sort of had to rewire my brain to say, how do we just eliminate the bad things that can happen? If we can do that, all we're left with is good things. That's the concept of asymmetry. That is the underpinnings of certainty. And ultimately what I feel Dan was really trying to get across with rigging the game is manufacturing things in a way that we have so much upside because we've just focused more on eliminating the downside. What do you think about that, Dan?
I think you did a really awesome job of explaining it. And yeah, you're hired. So I'll just have you do the interviews from now on for me.
There we go.
We have to go back to the way that we are wired as humans and not fight against these natural tendencies. So I believe that every human is inherently biased, and there's a ton of neuroscience to support this. We're biased. Part of these biases is motivated by this whole thing, dopamine, and how dopamine is really the molecule of more. So we are wired to always go after more. And it makes sense. I think about the early stages as a human. We got to go out and hunt and gather as much as possible. When there's an opportunity there, we got to take it because we don't know when we're going to see another deer or just saber-toothed tiger. I guess we don't want to see
woolly mammoth is what we used last time, right, Steve? Woolly mammoth.
Woolly mammoth. Thank you. Yeah, we don't know when we're going to be able to capitalize on taking down another woolly mammoth. So we got to capture it every time we see it. Right? And so we still have that biology of anytime we see something, we got to go after it. And the consequence of that is that we don't think about all the bad things that could happen. So if I'm a shooting guard, what is the biggest risk? The biggest risk is my whole team is shooting guards, so I never get the freaking ball. So I want the ball. I want to take the shots, which means I got to, instead of hiring people that I just like, that are just like me, the biggest risk is that I don't get the ball because I want to shoot it. So we don't like to focus on those negative things because then we also get labeled as, why do you always have to be so negative? Why can't you just be happy for me? You're such a negative Nancy. On and on and on. Debbie Downer. And my perspective on it is I'd rather eliminate all of that bad stuff now so that I never have to think about it again. I don't want to have these conversations every day for the rest of this business. Let me eliminate those now because then all I have is upside. So here's how this plays out practically. I'll use the book as an example. Okay, I want to write a book. Okay, well, what are the biggest risks of writing a book? Well, nobody buys it. And if nobody buys it, nobody reads it. So if my intention is to use this book to grow my business or my positioning as a thought leader, and nobody buys my book, so therefore nobody reads my book, and I didn't accomplish my mission. And on average, a new author will spend 300 hours writing their first book. So I just spent 300 hours on something I could have spent doing something else that would have had a higher return for my business, life, etc. So those risks are fairly obvious. So what do I do about it? Well, how can I find out if people are going to be willing to buy the book? And I talk about this principle, taking micro steps. So when I don't have any data, which almost always when we're doing something new, we have no data. Speculation is not data. I'm sorry. A single data point is not a trend. Sorry to point those things out. We have to take a step, ideally the smallest step possible, to get us some information. Would anybody be willing to buy this book if I wrote it? Here's a couple bullet points. A bunch of people raise their hand. Okay. Well, people will raise their hand, but that doesn't mean that they will actually buy. We vote with our wallet. It's really hard to get people to take out their wallet. Selling a $15 or $16 book is arguably just as hard as selling a $2,500 product. The challenges are roughly the same. It's surprising given the price discrepancy there, but if anyone has done any bit of marketing, you know that is true. So get people on a list, then get them to check out. Okay, I got enough people who are willing who raise their hand. I set a target in advance that I needed to hit. I hit that target. Now I'm going to collect their money. How many people do I need to collect money from to then say, okay, I'm going to write the book? And so it's just taking risk off the table. So in my case, I decided a couple years ago, I'm going to write this book. I did a Facebook post in a small group, and I decided that I needed 100 people to raise their hand, and I would need 50 people to buy it. So I got 100 people to raise their hand. I set up a checkout page. After I hit the 100, and more than 50 people pre-ordered it. I had something like 120 pre-orders. Okay, now I'm committed to it. All right, well, I want to get a publisher. How can you get a publisher? Well, typically you need an agent, a book proposal, all these other things. What's the least amount of effort, least amount of risk I can do to get a publisher? Well, there's a platform called Publishizer that's like a crowdsourcing thing for books. So I go on there and I decide, okay, I'm going to set the platform record for sales because I know that'll gain a bunch of attention. And so I took some micro steps to make that happen. And that's probably for another time to kind of break all that down. lock in. I think we sold something like 2,600 copies of the book. I got 10 publishing offers. I accepted one. I ended up changing publishers later. Long story long. The book is getting close to coming out. How do I get reviews? Because I need reviews to get onto various Amazon lists, etc. Let's take some more micro steps, so on and so forth. So the process is the same along the way. What's the smallest step I can take to take a risk off the table? And then I advance to the next step.
That's
So Dan, if I can add something to that, what you're saying is that the bigger the step you take, the more risk, and ultimately the bigger the downside.
Yeah. Yeah. So we have this bias in it. I think we probably have a lot of real estate people on here.
Mm-hmm.
Can we all agree in this virtual room right now that you value the properties you own more than the properties you don't own?
100%.
Why wouldn't you?
Because we own it. I mean, of course, we saw
We
value
own
in
it.
it.
Why wouldn't we? I don't care about my neighbor's house. I mean, I don't want something bad to happen to it, right? And I hope they maintain it because it helps my property value and they're nice humans. But at the end of the day, I'm more concerned about my own stuff, right? Not to sound selfish, but that's just the truth.
It's human.
That is obvious with a house or a car or something significantly tangible, but actually it's the same thing with our ideas. I value my own ideas more than I value your ideas, and vice versa. And so when I take a big step toward some goal, I own that. I call it naming the puppy, and I got a whole story on that, anecdote about it. But I own that. The bigger the step, the more ownership, right? The $2 million house I value more than the $100,000 house. Right? So the bigger the step I take, the more that I own it, the harder it is for me to change my mind later. And so that's why I try to take the smallest step possible so that I don't own the idea as much, because I assume that I'm biased and I'm going to get locked in on something and my ego is going to take over and all those sort of things. And I don't want to put myself in a position where I'm going to wreck myself later, because I've seen myself do that several times in the past. And I don't want to continue to do that.
Well, this was really helpful because I'm actually having a book published very, very shortly as well. It's not going to be it's not going to be as, thank you. It's not going to be as interesting or as helpful here. It's really just a biography for my parents, but I had one, I had it commissioned and I'm going to get it published. I heard you say something here, right? The bigger the step, the more you're going to be committed to it, right? Or it's going to be harder to talk you out of it. And there was something you said recently that really resonated with me. I struggled with it, but it really resonated with me. And it was that I reserve the right to change my mind. And I had a hard conversation with someone yesterday. And they had made a commitment to me. And what I said to them was like, hey, look, I know you made a commitment to me, but some things have changed since you made that commitment. So I learned something recently, right? A mentor of mine, Dan, said, I reserve the right to change my mind. So look, I get that you made this commitment, but it's been a while. So if you want to change your mind, like, I'm totally good. Don't commit to this out of guilt. Can you elaborate on this?
Yeah, I think most of us have this espoused value. And first off, I'm proud of you for having that conversation and giving somebody else permission to reserve the right to change their mind. Yeah. So many of us, we have this espoused value where we say, I do what I say I'm going to do. And like my word is gold, and I do what I say I'm going to do. And that's admirable on the surface, at least. But let's pick extremes, because the extremes usually illustrate the point, right? Which is, I say, hey, let's meet at 7 o'clock at this restaurant down the street for dinner. Okay. I get there early. Restaurant's on fire. I don't go into the building. Like, well, hold on, Dan, you said you do what you're saying you're going to do. Like, why aren't you in the building right now? Are we supposed to meet for for dinner here? It says 7 o'clock. Why are you standing outside, or why'd you go home? It's like, well, the restaurant's on fire. So right? Like new evidence has presented itself. It's not safe for me to go in here, right? I'm going to die. And it's obvious. Okay, well, how many business decisions, as new data presented itself, in it's now that opportunity is on fire. So it's the dumpster fire at this point, rather than the restaurant fire. But we go, well, I do what I say I'm going to do, so I got to follow through on it. Well, you're going to knowingly walk into clear and apparent danger, clear and present danger? No, that's the right thing to do is to reserve the right to change your mind. And that's where we come back to this conversation about discipline. And discipline, we ask yourself the question, would you be a disciple of yourself? So self-discipline is, are you willing to be a disciple of yourself? And so I like to think about it as someone following you around with a camera. There's a philosophy, I believe it's called ethical egoism. It's this sort of concept of if you were followed around with a camera and then it had to be played back to your mom, would you want her to watch it? Or you're on TV? And if the answer is no, then you're probably doing the wrong thing. And the same thing is here with this whole other concept, discipline. If you're followed around and you watched it, would you want to follow that person who happens to be you? If the answer is no, then you need to change your behavior. You're not in alignment with your values. And so I would not want to follow somebody around who is unwilling to change their mind in the face of clear danger or in the face of something that's not going to serve them or their community or their constituents, friends, etc. To me, it's much more admirable to go, I made this commitment, but right now, this is not going to be beneficial to either one of us. So what are we going to do about it? Because it's not appropriate for us to just keep going on because we said we're going to do it. That takes a lot of fortitude. And that's the kind of person that I want to be. That's the type of person I would be willing to follow, that has the fortitude to go, you know what, I was wrong. This doesn't no longer make sense. Let's do something different. Now, that doesn't mean you leave the person high and dry. It's like, let's do something different. And how do I help you as well?
Yeah, it's powerful.
So that's an ongoing gut check. I mean, there are times that I say, yeah, I'd be a disciple of myself. And there's times that I have to answer that question with, if I'm being honest, with a no, and that's a gut check. And then I got to like reorient and get myself back on track.
Yeah. I think the thing with the camera walking around, your mom watching it, I feel pretty good with almost all of it. I think she would be surprised at how much I curse. But beyond that, I feel pretty good with it. The other thing that I really resonated with me from the book was the greatest risk you can take. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, outside of death, I believe that the greatest risk that you can take is not living the life that you want. And we've all seen the TV shows, the person on the deathbed, and they're looking back on their life and they're filled with regret. And that's really kind of what I'm talking about around this greatest risk in life, is looking back and not living the life that you want. And if we accept that to be true, then we have to get clear on what it is that we want to live, what we want from our life. So we have to get clear on that. And then we need to start aligning our actions with our intentions. And therefore we're taking steps where we're actually getting closer to what we want, not necessarily assuming that more is the answer to everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, those wealth commandments are so, I feel them viscerally. It was sort of like, I didn't quite understand how I made decisions before learning all this. And I had to, that was tough because, Steve, you and I are engineers. I mean, Dan's an accountant. Like, we have technical backgrounds, and that we think that we're making, good, logical, rational decisions. And really what I look back was, it's like, you're just behaving like, the humans did back in the woolly mammoth days. Like, you're just chasing things because it's more, because your biology was wired that way. And so, Dan, this book that you came out with, it is a blueprint. It is an actual guide to make better decisions. That's how I think of the Certainty operating system. You know, I've got it written right here on my desk, all of them. Right, I carry this around. In fact, we need to get the same little cards that Dr. Jeff gave us. We got to get this printed on a card. I already got Sonia working on it because I'm like, I need this in my card to carry around. At this point, I've got them all pretty much memorized. But is that coming?
No, I was just saying that's awesome. I should do that, and I'm excited to hear Sonia's working on it.
And so, you guys on this call, when we started this podcast, because we have so much to talk about on this subject, because Dan has done such a great job just documenting his way of thinking and approaching things like growth. So you're alluding to, the preponderance of data, and we need to take micro steps, and we don't scale until we hit predefined targets, all these different things that you're describing. Mm-hmm. These are all ways to remove risk. It's all meant, the frames, the issue processors, the growth principles, the wealth commandments, these are all things designed to help you rig the game for your life. And the biggest risk that we face in life is not living the life we want, not getting the things that we want out of life because we play other people's games, because we're chasing more, because we don't have a framework for making good decisions. I don't care how analytical you think you are. If you don't have an operating system and a framework to make decisions, your human biology is going to take over more often than not. And what you're doing is you're creating more work for yourself. You're creating more risk to getting what you want. You're reducing your optionality. And it was just, I can honestly say this operating system right here completely changed the way I approach business and investing and my personal life. So I just want to say thank you so much for creating this book. If you guys want to learn like direct from the source more about this, go pick up this book.
Yeah, how did they get this book, Dan?
Well, first off, Paul, thank you for everything you just said. And if you want to check out the book, you can just go to riggingamazon.com, and that'll redirect you to the Amazon page, and you can kind of take it from there. So yeah, riggingamazon.com. And yeah, I really appreciate everything that you just shared. So thank you for saying that.
And just to add on to that, right? Like, we're not saying you can't try to do big things. That's not what we're saying at all, right? It's the fact that most people saying to do big things also tell you need to go all in. They also tell you need to burn the boats, right? We're saying you can try to do big things. You can go for it. But here's how we mitigate risk along the way.
So once you start to realize that those people who have done the truly extraordinary, they can naturally see asymmetry to the upside, and they naturally remove downside risk, right? Bill Gates starting Microsoft, how much asymmetry to the upside was there in computing at that time? So much. I mean, we can see now that with the science of hindsight, all the things Elon Musk has done, all the things in crypto that are happening right now. You go on and on and on, and what you actually see is that these so-called risk takers, they were systematically eliminating downside risk, eliminating the bad stuff, but they were also only working on opportunities where there was a huge amount of upside. Thousands, tens of thousands, millions upside relative to the downside, right? Most of us aren't playing in that space. We got a service-based business, right? We're working hard. Those service-based businesses inherently are not 10x, 100x, 1000x businesses. So we're taking all this risk where the relative return just isn't there. So we've got to work harder to eliminate the downside risk, really in everything that we do. It's a different way of thinking. Paul, or Steve, you kind of teed me up on this whole burn the boats thing. So many of us have been told, like, well, Dan, I'm supposed to go all in and burn the boats. If you go back and you study the history of burn the boats, it actually means to take the least amount of risk, not the most amount of risk. risk.
Bigger steps, bigger downside. Burn that boat, you just increase your downside.
Yeah, so the backstory is in this battle in 1519 with Cortez, he burned the boats and forced his men to go into battle because if he went back home, he was told they would be killed for treason. So he had only one option to go into battle, not to go home. And so burning the boats to force his men to go into battle, yeah, there were casualties, but that was actually the least risky option. Entrepreneurs take that anecdote and they use it to sell you a mastermind and get you to take on a bunch of debt because you're supposed to go all in. But actually, you should take the least amount of risk relative to all options.
Yeah. Burn the boats is backwards, just kind of like the way everyone's interpreted it is backwards, just kind of like, the jack of all trades, the master of none, but still better than the master of one, right? We always eliminate that last part of the jack of all trades. Quote. So
yeah, I just prefer to cherry pick the things that make me feel good and leave the rest out.
So wrapping up here, is there anything you want to leave with the people that are watching right now, watching or listening?
Yeah. What always comes to mind to me is if you're not going to take actions to get you closer to what you want, what are you doing? What's the point? You're going to get scrutinized no matter what, right? You get scrutinized for what you do and you get scrutinized for what you don't do. And so if I'm going to take daggers and get criticized no matter what, I'm just going to play my game. And I'm going to make sure that I'm systematically getting closer to what I want. Because I don't want to be the person on my deathbed looking back on my life with a bunch of regrets.
Yeah.
And I hope that everyone that's watching feels the same way. I don't want anybody to look back on their life and go and have all these what ifs because they weren't willing to endeavor to play their own game.
Yeah. That's incredibly powerful. I love it. Paul?
Just go pick up this book. You won't be disappointed. I've read the manuscript probably 3 or 4 times because I've been working on it for creating, content for Whale Club. Read the book and then keep listening to this podcast, right? Because this is where we're talking about it every single week. I mean, we're not without conversations or topics to have on this. It's an ongoing, infinite game, as you say, Dan. So, go pick up this book. Keep tuning in. We're going to be talking more about this every single week.
Yep, exactly. So thank you, Dan, so much for coming on the show. And again, just to reiterate, everyone, riggingamazon.com, go buy that book right now. We'll see you all next week.